a wedding feast is crazy, filled to the rafters, with singing and dancing, feasting, eating, partying. We're going to go find a quiet place to talk.
You know, in Matthew 22, Jesus tells a parable about a wedding feast. The king is going to have a wedding feast for his son, so he invites his friends, the nobility, the rulers. He says, "Come to the wedding feast of my son." And he sends out his servants to invite them. The servants go. The friends of the king, the nobility, the rulers, the elites reject it. They're too busy. They ignore this. Now this is to shame the king in this culture, you know, is basically an offer they shouldn't or couldn't refuse, but they do it anyway. And then the servants come back to the king, and the king sends the servants out again. He says, with, you know, great expediency, he says, "Look, the feast is ready, the feast of my son, the wedding feast. The oxen has been killed, the feast is ready. Come to the wedding feast." And again, when the servants go out, they treat it as if it's a joke and totally reject it. They turn away, and it gets so bad that they start abusing some of the slaves of the king and killing some of them too. At that point in the parable, Jesus makes a prophecy. He stops the flow of the chronology and says that the king sent his army and destroyed those wicked ones in their city. Jesus is making a prophecy about what's going to happen in 70 AD. You know, the Pharisees are standing right in front of Jesus. The chief priests are standing right in front of Jesus when he's saying this parable and making this prophecy to them. And then he continues. The king decides that he's going to invite anyone and everyone to the wedding feast, so he sends his servants out to the highways and the byways to bring people in. So basically the king's inviting, you know, the lowest of the low in that culture, in the tax collectors, the prostitutes, everyone into the wedding feast. So the servants bring both the good and the bad in, and the wedding is full to the rafters. The feast is popping out. You know, it's a great party, and everyone's enjoying themselves, having a great time with the music, the dancing, the wine, the song, the food. Everything's, you know, everyone's there. And when the king comes in, he's enjoying the party, but he notices that there's one guest, only one guest, who's not wearing the wedding robes that the king has provided. Everyone else has put on these robes, but this one has worn his own robes. And we must remember that standing before Jesus as he's saying this parable, the Pharisees, the chief priests, wearing their own robes, their own sign and symbols of authority. This is a parable where Jesus is showing the Pharisees that they've rejected the authority of God. They've rejected his Messiah, and the kingdom is being taken away from them. So Jesus continues that this one, the king turns to this one and says, "Friend," and this is an ironic term. He's using sarcasm here. He says, "Friend, how did you get in here?" You know, he's looking at the robe and saying, you know, you've tried to come in on your own righteousness, on your own authority. And the king turns to his servants and says, "Bind this one hand and foot and cast him into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So this one alone is cast into outer darkness. The rest, the party goes on. And this one is thrown there on his own. And Jesus is making a prophecy here about what's going to happen again in 70 AD, that the leadership is going to be taken away from the Pharisees, from the chief priests and the religious elites of Israel, that they're going to be cast into outer darkness. Now, the Jews would hear this and they would remember back to 586 BC. They have a very long memory. It would seem like a very short time ago when the Jews were brought into Babylon, bound hand and foot, especially the leadership, taken into captivity there. And that was for them outer darkness, because Jerusalem, the temple, was the light, the center where heaven met earth. And this is what was going to happen to them. And so Jesus ends the parable with this, that this one is cast into outer darkness where he's bound hand and foot. He's not talking about hell, but something very specific historically. Then the parable ends with this saying, which the church has taken so wrong for many, many years. You know, it says, Jesus says, "For many are called, but few are chosen." You know, we've often in the church have taken it to mean that, you know, many are called in the church or many are called in the world, but only a few are going to make it. Most are going to hell. Only a few are going to be in heaven. But what Jesus is doing is using a parody because this is the Pharisees' own way of thinking, and he's using it against them, their own way of thinking, because Pharisee means separated one, and they've separated themselves from Israel, they separated themselves from the nation, they were called to be the light of the world, and now because of their separateness, they are going to be cast into outer darkness. So their own mentality was, many are called in Israel, but few are chosen. You know, if we few Pharisees are going to be the ones that are going to be making it. We are the ones good with God. But we can see that the Pharisees get what Jesus is up to. They get it, because in the next verse it says that the Pharisees look for a way to trap Jesus. You know, they realize Jesus is letting us have it in the whole series of 3 parables in that passage, Matthew 21 and 22. Jesus is speaking specifically against the Pharisees. It's not a teaching on heaven and hell. It's a teaching against the Pharisees. And Jesus continues through the next chapter saying, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, and making woes and proclamations against them, that the kingdom is going to be taken away from them. They're going to be cast into outer darkness. But really, this parable of the wedding feast is more about a radical parable of inclusion, that everyone is called into the wedding feast. Everyone is called in to come and enjoy both the good and the bad. There's no one on the outside. Everyone is on the inside. The rafters are full. The place is complete and whole with all kinds of people, black, white, yellow, red. Everyone's there. The music is playing. There's partying, there's singing, there's dancing. This is the kingdom, this is the life of the Trinity, this is the life of the Father and Son. The kingdom is a wedding feast. So brothers and sisters, celebrate, party, enjoy, because you're radically included in love. In Jesus' name.